Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we've got more Duskmourn spoilers. This is the second day of spoilers here, so let's jump right into it and see what we got today. This one I think actually was from the first day, but was spoiled a little later. So I'm putting it into this video. It is a 3 mana green creature. I know this picture is not the best of Tyvar here. Um, this is the best I could find online. I'm not sure why the picture is. Let me know in the comments below why the picture is not great, but maybe it was kind of spoiled in a sneaky way. So this is what we get for Tyvar the Pummeler. But it is a 3 mana elf warrior legend, 3/3, and it has two abilities. One, tap another untapped creature you control, and it gains indestructible, and you tap it. So pretty decent just on defense to kind of be able to block with this, give it block, give it indestructible by tapping another creature. Um, then you can tap it after block, so you can do that, which is pretty nice. And then 5 mana to pump all your creatures. Creatures you control get plus X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So by itself, having 3 power gives all your creatures +3/+3, which is pretty good. Could be even more if you have bigger creatures out. So kind of how do you use this in standard? The first thing I thought of was like Agatha's Soul Cauldron because it's got 2 activated abilities. So pretty good abilities that you could give to any other creature. If you had a creature, if you exiled this underneath Agatha's Soul Cauldron, you give all your creatures the ability just to tap and give them indestructible. That's pretty strong. All of them also had the ability to kind of overrun depending on their power. And also Agatha's Soul Cauldron gives +1/+1 to the creature. So that kind of boosts their power already. So I think it's a pretty decent card in a Soul Cauldron deck. Also, there are some other elf synergies in standard. The Leaf Crown Visionary, there's Boja. Those are kind of the 2 main ones, but you can pump this up, which then makes its last ability even bigger to pump your whole team. So there's some synergy there, and then even its first ability kind of has some synergy with the survival mechanic. We have a new survival card here that I just wanted to put on this slide as well. The Glimmer Seeker, which is a 3 mana human survivor, 3/3, and it says at the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, draw a card. If you control a Glimmer creature, and if you don't control a Glimmer creature, you create a 1/1 white Glimmer enchantment creature token. So that's pretty cool. This guy creates as noted, it's an enchantment creature, so that kind of triggers all your other enchantment synergies. But if you can just not have to attack with him, you can tap him down with Tyvar and just kind of like hold him back on defense. You can just use Tyvar to give it indestructible every turn, and then at the beginning of your second main phase, um, you can trigger the survival ability. So the other thing you can do, so because Survivor, I believe it only triggers on your second main phase. Yeah, so you'd have to do it. You could attack with Tyvar, and then after it's declared as an attacker, you can still use its ability to tap other things to give it indestructible as an attacker as well. So there's some cool synergy there with the survival mechanic. We'll see. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Tyvar. Again, when Landwehr Elves comes out, I think that's actually going to be pretty decent with Tyvar because that is another elf, and this is an elf, and maybe that could really boost the elf strategies. But we'll have to wait until Foundations until we get Landwehr Elves, so we'll see about that. All right, next up, we've got a new room card. If you don't know what those room cards are, you can check out my first video where I talked about them a couple days ago. But essentially, you can cast either side of these. So this one, you can cast the Mirror Room for 3 mana or the Fractured Realm for 5 mana. Comes into play, it unlocks that side of the room, basically unlocks that ability. And then later in the game, you can cast or unlock, I should say, the other half of the room by paying the other cost of that. Now, I'm not sure if you can use like other like activated ability costs to cast either of those. There's some creatures in standard that do that tap for only abilities. I think you have to pay the full cost on it, and you can't use kind of that special mana. But this one is a mirror room, which on the left side, the 3 mana enchantment says whenever you unlock the door, so if you can just cast it for 3, it'll unlock that. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it's a reflection in addition to its other creature types. So a clone for 3 mana, which is decent. And then the Other side, which is 5 mana, the Fractured Realm. It's if a triggered ability of a permanent you control triggers, the ability triggers an additional time. So like a Panharmonicon effect, very expensive Panharmonicon effect, but it's kind of tacked onto this. You can kind of see this card if you did it the other way around. If you played the 7 mana uh, half first, and then you did the 3 mana room second, you would trigger that ability actually twice. You could target 2 of your things and double up your copies. So that could be kind of cool, but it is a lot of mana, and I would expect you typically cast the left side first. So kind of one of the synergies with this, again, we kind of have to see all the different room synergies, and Eerie is sort of one of the cards that plays well with it. We already got the Scrabbling Skull Crab, which is an Eerie card. So when you play the room, it would trigger the Eerie effect. Then you can make another copy of the Skull Crab, and then when you unlocked the second half of this, that would also trigger the Eerie ability, because it says the Eerie ability say whenever you fully unlock a room. And then the Fractured Realm would actually double that ability. So maybe there's some sort of mill deck with those two cards. There's some synergy there. So there's something, I don't know. Again, we're going to have to see kind of what other room synergies, what other Eerie cards we get. But Eerie does kind of play well with these room cards, I think intentionally. And then the other thing I'm thinking about, just like this card, its mana value is 10, I believe, because 7 on one side, 3 on the other. So you could just play it in like a Caustic Bronco deck, which would be kind of cool. Just to, you could set up the top of your deck maybe with Scry or whatever, or just kind of randomly have this card in your deck as a 3 mana clone. But if you happen to hit it off Caustic Bronco, you have to saddle it. Don't attack without saddling. You would just like tend to your opponent. So maybe there's some cool uh, deck with Caustic Bronco that uses a bunch of room cards because their mana cost is so high. So I don't know. Some ideas there. Let me know in the comments if you have other ideas for this one. It seems like there's some interesting stuff. The other, I mean, a lot of people are asking about rooms and like if you can blink them or like reanimate them. And no, you can't. I mean, you can, but they come into play with nothing unlocked. Then I guess it does let you kind of, if you did blink this thing, you would be able to pay 3 again and do that, but and get another copy of something, which is something, but you can't really like cheat the costs in any way, at least that I'm aware of on these cards. So that is our new Mythic Room card. Next up, we've got the Undead Sprinter. This card's pretty sweet. A 2 mana zombie, red and black, 2/2 with trample and haste. So already that's decent stats. 2/2 haste for 2. If you play in aggro decks quite often, and trample is a nice bonus. And then it says you may cast it from your graveyard if a non-zombie creature died this turn. And if you do, it comes into play with an additional +1/+1 counter, with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this card, like a zombie, is like coming back from the dead over and over and over again, right? Um, so there are, we lost a lot of zombie tribal synergies. There was a bunch in the last set that just rotated out of standard. So that's unfortunate. You kind of lose that. This could be played in maybe older, pioneer zombies, maybe potentially. But in standard, there are still some zombie synergies. There's Gissa, which pumps all your zombies and skeletons. So there's that, and makes zombie tokens themselves. But this card, I think, on its own is pretty decent, just with removal spells, because note that it says a non-zombie creature died, not a non-zombie creature you control died. So your opponent's creatures dying will trigger this or let you cast it from your graveyard. So if you played it on 2, you attacked, or they killed it with something, you traded it off, whatever. Then the next turn, if you cut down one of their guys, you Doomblade one of their guys, whatever, shock one of their guys, then you can pay the 2 and return it back into play, as long as the creature you're killing is not a non-zombie, of course. Then you can just pay 2 and get back a 3/3 trample haste, which is pretty good. So yeah, this card is very impressive to me. The other kind of like cute thing I was thinking about doing with this, I mean, this probably is not very viable, but it's funny if you were able to cast this with flash. This would be like a very very annoying blocker, right? Because um, if you were able to block with this and trade one of your opponent's creatures, Um, then you would count the ability that something had died that was a non-zombie. Then you could cast it during your opponent's turn, bring it back into play, and basically, if you were able to keep as a 3/3 and were able to keep trading off with your opponent's creatures on defense, you could do that. It also works on offense if you attack and you trade with your opponent's creature. Then you can cast it again in your second main phase. So with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this card is very resilient, keeps coming back like a zombie should, perhaps. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this one. I think this is definitely gonna see some play in aggro decks for sure. Okay, next up, some of the lower rarity cards. So not a ton of cards that got spoiled today, but some pretty good uncommons, I would say. Fear of Isolation, which is a 2 mana enchantment creature. So it is an enchantment creature, and it's a nightmare. It's a 2/3 flyer, but it has this additional cost to cast it, and you return any permanent you control to its owner's hand. So you could return lands from your battlefield to your hand, and then trigger landfall again, for example, if you wanted to. It's similar to Nurturing Pixie, right? But the thing about this card is that it can, if you have a second copy of it, you can return itself to uh, its owner's hand. So two of these is pretty good. You can kind of loop them for 2 mana over and over again. I was thinking would be pretty good with Eerie cards or anything that triggers with an enchantment coming into play. You can just kind of loop them over and over again. We also got another new Eerie card here, which is the Unwilling Vessel, the 3 mana 3/2 with Vigilance. And it says whenever an enchantment you control enters or when you fully unlock a room, put a possession counter on it. And then when it dies, you get an XX blue spirit creature token with flying, where X is the number of counters on Unwilling Vessel. This card is kind of cool. This Unwilling Vessel. It is sort of another Eerie card. So if you kept looping the Fear of Isolations over and over again, you would keep getting counters on it, for example. But we'll also have to see what other Eerie cards. I think we just have this in the Crab. So if you did this with the Crab, you'd keep milling them. Um, so that could be something interesting to trigger all the kind of enchantment whenever enchantment comes into play. Nurturing Pixie, if you use this alongside Nurturing Pixie, it also creates sort of like a loop every 3 mana. You could use the Nurturing Pixie to return the Fear of Isolation, cast the Fear of Isolation to return the Nurturing Pixie, and kind of keep going there. And that would trigger if you have like any creatures, anything that works whenever a creature is cast or whenever a creature comes into play, or whenever enchantment comes into play, every 3 mana that would trigger those same things. So like Soul Warden effects to gain a life every time a creature comes to play. For example, you could kind of continually loop those into each other. So maybe there's something there. But also just kind of as a value play. I mean, there already kind of is this Nurturing Pixie deck with like Hopeless Nightmare, different enchantments and artifacts that when they come into play, they have an ability that triggers, and then you can return them back to your hand and cast them again. So you go turn 1 Hopeless Nightmare, make them discard, lose 2, and then Fear of Isolation on 2, return it, then the next turn cast it again. That also triggers a bunch of enchantments coming into play. So there's definitely some synergies here for sure. I have a feeling this guy's going to find a home somewhere in Standard. Again, we'll kind of have to see what other Eerie cards we get, but definitely some combo synergy potential with Fear of Isolation for sure. Also note the Unwilling Vessel says X is the number of counters on it, not necessarily just the possession counter. So if you put a bunch of +1/+1 counters, or I know they're minus X or -1/-1 counters are also a theme in this set. So maybe there's a way to dump a bunch of minus counters on it and then trigger its ability that way. So something to keep in mind with that card. Okay, speaking of -1/-1 counters, we've got the patched Plaything, which is a 3 mana white artifact creature toy, 4/3 with double strike, and enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it if you cast it from your hand. So this card is pretty cool, pretty sweet, I think. There's lots of different ways to kind of get around this -1/-1 counters on this, because having a 3 mana 4/3 double strike, if that was just what you saw there, is really good rate. But as it is, if you just cast it from your hand, it will be a 2/1 double strike, which is all right, which could trade for some stuff. And then if it died, you could helping hand it back into play, and then it would, for example, come back, but wouldn't have the counters on it. or if you cast it from exile, because it says you have to cast it from your hand, with Ren's Resolve, if you kind of exile casted it. There's a lot of cards that in red that lets you cast things from exile, so that would be another way to get uh, it to come into play without the counters. Also, there's cards that remove counters in standard. One of them being the Inquiry Dominus, the 4 mana blue Phyrexian Horror. Its last ability says that you can remove 3 counters from among artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers you control to get a indestructible counter on it. So that's something just to note as another way of like removing counters if -1/-1 counters. I think that's going to be somewhat of a theme. Thinking of ways just to remove those as well. So that's some synergy there. Also to note with patch playthings is that it is an artifact and a creature. So for Delirium, it works as 2 types. I mean, we already have some artifact creatures available in standard, but just another thing to note if you're trying to go for Delirium and looking to fill up your graveyard with different types pretty easily. So this is a pretty cool little uncommon here. Next up, we've got the Smoky Lounge and the Misty Salon, which is a room. As you can see, it is another split card here. You can cast either half. So the Smoky Lounge is enchantment at the beginning of your first main phase. You add 2 red mana, spend this mana only to cast rooms and unlock doors. So really, this is asking you, it really wants you to play in like a room themed deck. I think perhaps this is kind of the uncommon, the limited signpost uncommon. Let me know if that's right. I think that this probably is. Maybe blue red is kind of the color combination for rooms. Although the only other rooms we have here so far, we don't really sure. Is one in white and the other one is in blue. So I don't know. We'll see. The Misty Salon says whenever you unlock that door, you create a XX blue spirit creature token with flying, where X is the number of unlocked doors among rooms you control. So you could, you could cast this on 3, and then on turn 4, you could use 2 of the mana to unlock the second half of it. Being able to kind of have an enchantment that adds 2 mana to your mana pool every turn is pretty good. That is a good rate for sure, but there's certainly the restriction of it. You can only spend it on room stuff. So you really kind of have to go all in on rooms for this to work, and the other half wants you to have unlocked as many unlocked doors as possible to make a bigger token. I mean, so by itself, just the 2 of these, it would unlock and make a 2/2, which isn't great. But if you had other unlocked rooms, then that would be pretty good. For example, we just talked about the mirror room and the fractured, um, the other half of that room up there, and triggering abilities twice is something that seems to be a theme in the rooms themselves. For example, the Dollmaker Shop is a triggered ability, so maybe there is just like this Jeskai room deck that you just kind of jam all these together and it's decent. I'm not really sure. Obviously, we'll have to see how it all plays out. It does seem like all of them at least make tokens, which is something that I'm noticing. So maybe there's some theme there with tokens. Yeah. So I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But we really kind of have to. This really depends on what other rooms we get. Maybe there'll be some 1 mana rooms. That would be kind of cool. I'm not sure. Sometimes I don't really do that because it's like too cheap and it enables too many synergies. But we'll really just kind of have to keep an eye on this one as we go through the spoiler season. So last up, we got the land, which is a whole cycle. There's 10 of these common lands that say they enter tapped unless a player has 13 or less life. So any player, you or any of your opponents, and then their dual lands. So you got 10 of them, each for one for each color pair, which is pretty good for limited, definitely. And Pauper, I think this would probably see some amount of play for sure. And I don't know, I saw some people on Twitter talking about Death's Shadow. I don't really know if you want to play this in Death's Shadow. You are trying to get to 13 life, as quickly as possible under 13 life. So these would come into play untapped, but you also kind of want to keep reducing your life in Death's Shadow. So I don't know. Yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about playing these into the Death Shadow deck. I'm not really sure. I was thinking, like, would you see these in constructed at all? Like, you kind of don't want these in an aggro deck, even though you are trying to like get your opponent down to 13 life. The fact that they come into play tapped, probably within like in the first 1 or 2 turns, is not very good for an aggro deck. I think they're actually better in like a control deck with like sweepers, like Day of Judgment, which is coming in Foundations, or any other sweepers. I think that's kind of where you potentially could play these, because in control decks you don't necessarily mind your lands coming into play tap early. You kind of are letting your opponent deal damage to you and then sweeping the board later, um, as a way to get your tempo back. So I think that has some potential. There's also like ways of manipulating your life total. In older formats, there's like fetch lands, shock lands. I don't know if these would see play in those formats. Like I'm thinking, but in standard, you have like the ping lands, Adhikar wastes, which could make a difference if, say, you're at 14 life. Um, you could tap the Adhikar wastes, do a damage to yourself, and then tap and play this untapped when you're at 13. So, I mean, dual lands that are unconditionally coming into play untapped are very good. So I could see some of these seeing some play, maybe in control decks or mid range potentially. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what you think about these guys as well. So that is all we have thus far today with spoilers for Duskmourn. The set is looking cool and eerie and kind of complex with these like room cards. I'm very intrigued to see what they do whenever they create a new card type. Like, how good is it? Because we're not quite sure if they are gonna what the power level is going to be there. So anyways, yeah, let me know in the comments below any cool combos, any decks you're excited about building. What are your thoughts on the set so far? Thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.